So for our presentation, we chose the virus of rabies. Rabies is a rod-shaped or pill-shaped protein that is covered in spikes made up of glycoprotein. Approximately on each viral cell, there are 400 glycoprotein spikes. The entire cell is typically covered with a protein envelope made up of matrix protein. The rabies virus is single-stranded and has a negative sense with a limited coding capacity. A negative sense RNA strand actually has to be converted to positive sense to then be used for translation in protein synthesis. The whole genome of the rabies virus only codes for 5 proteins, which is relatively small compared to the human genome of over 20,000 proteins. Rabies is typically introduced to mammals through saliva, typically through some sort of bite. Within that muscle tissue, the virus replicates and reproduces copies of itself using the muscle cells ribosomes. After it's done replicating, it uses the peripheral nervous system to head to the spinal cord and brain. This is facilitated by the P75NRT protein that is a pathway for nerve growth factor to enter into neurons. The rabies virus mimics nerve growth factors and then is picked up and then both through pinocytosis and then also funneled through the cell, through the axon, this in the same way. So this increases the rate of translation by up to 40%, which is very significant when we're talking about someone's life. Sorry. So the symptoms of rabies initially will be a fever, headache, and typically tingly or whole body aches. After the virus has made its way to the brain, you'll now start to see personality changes that are typically portrayed in movies, like restlessness, confusion, and paranoia. Typically, people don't want to drink water and have very spasmodic throats or vocal cords, as well as an increased production of saliva. In the end stage, this is where the virus is now running rampant inside the brain. The brain begins to swell as a cerebral edema, which then puts pressure onto different parts of the brain that control different functions. These can cause seizures, and then induce a coma. From this coma, once you enter a coma, it's typically hours left on your life, where the final cause of death is usually seizures, whole body paralysis, or brain damage.
So we'll start to talk about the history of rabies.
Oh.
So the history of rabies, it was first discovered, but there was no first discovery of rabies that has actually been written, but rather people began to observe animal behavior thousands of years ago. So whenever people would observe animals, they would begin to notice abnormal behavior in animals. And whenever people would observe abnormal behavior in animals, and these animals would become rabid and either bite someone or pass the virus to another animal, they begin to notice more unusual behavior. And then that's whenever a Roman scholar named Celsus hypothesized that the virus could be transmitted through saliva. So once again, there is no specific date when rabies was actually discovered. It has been observed for thousands of years. And as people would observe it, Aristotle eventually spoke about it in 300 BC. And he noticed that it was one of the diseases that would affect dogs and other animals or people that the dog would eventually bite. So the virus was discovered a very long time ago in an unknown location once again. Due to its ancient background, one could potentially hypothesize that it was either around Asia or Europe. However, during the British colonization of the Americas in the 1600s, the local Native American population would begin to notice increasing rabid behaviors among animals, and so would the British colonizers. So the Western Hemisphere then eventually saw an increase in rabies during that time. Up until 1885, there was no vaccine or any way to treat rabies until Louis Pasteur actually came along in 1885 and researched and designed a vaccine. So there are various hosts for rabies. The primary hosts include mammals. There's a variety of mammals, but commonly they will be found in dogs, foxes, skunks, and then these animals can eventually pass rabies on to humans. So once bitten, or once the saliva is affecting the animal or human system, the rabies will attack the central nervous system. It will eventually travel to the brain and once again will cause abnormal behavior. So this will ultimately lead to flu-like symptoms such as dizziness, nausea, headache, weakness, and once you begin to experience symptoms, it can ultimately lead to death.
So rabies is somewhat similar to COVID-19. They have really similar symptoms, like the flu is super similar to those. Some of the symptoms of rabies are fever, headache, nausea, vomiting, agitation, anxiety, hydrophobia, and hallucinations, and then ultimately death if it's not treated within a certain amount of time. And some of the symptoms of COVID is you still have nausea, you have difficulty breathing, you have fatigue, vomiting, you got a loss of taste and smell, you're coughing. So the recovery rate of these two are somewhat different because the rabies has a 100% recovery rate if you seek treatment within about a couple of days within infection. And if you don't, then you have 100% death because you end up with hallucinations, hydrophobia, your body ends up working against you, and then you ultimately end up dying. But COVID is between a 97% and 99.75% recovery rate, but it's still being researched at this time. And for the rabies vaccine, you end up getting 1 dose of immune globulin and 4 doses of rabies vaccine over a period of 2 weeks. So the vaccines are given in arms and legs, and as of 2016, there were only 14 documented survivors of the rabies vaccine, which is a much smaller survival rate compared to the COVID-19, where we have people who are infected, and then you still have people who survive, but I mean, there's still a high death rate for COVID. The rabies vaccine has been available for more than 100 years, so about 60,000 plus deaths annually are due to inadequate health resources in over 150 countries. Most infections come from stray dogs or animals that have bitten humans in these countries. COVID has been confirmed in Africa, African territories, the Americas, Eastern Mediterranean, Western Pacific territories, and multiple other places. There are over 7.27 million confirmed cases worldwide and 413,000 deaths. There are over 2 million cases and over 100,000 deaths confirmed in the United States. Unlike rabies, researchers are still trying to develop a vaccine. There are countless hours being put into researching a cure that hard scientists around the world are working for. Nonetheless, Both viruses continue to affect thousands of people every day worldwide, and researchers are making advances to make the world a healthier place. Thank you for listening. Cool. That's over 10 minutes.